everyone! Welcome to Literature Revision with Mr. Johnston. Today we're going to analyse Eric's interrogation scene. As we're going to discover, Eric is a complex character, full of contradictions. Now you might want to take some notes as you watch this clip. If you do, try clicking the link in the description box below this video. For free, you can download the relevant section of my textbook on this extract. It comes complete with writing tables for taking notes, short writing tasks, and exemplar paragraphs. And now, on to Eric Birling. Before we analyse this scene, let's revise what we have learnt so far in this play about Eric's character. Eric is the son of Mr. and Mrs. Birling. He has enjoyed a privileged public school upbringing. The stage directions describe him as half shy, half assertive, so Eric seems outspoken but lacking in confidence at the same time. The stage directions also tell us that Eric is not quite at ease. These words seem to suggest that he is somewhat uncomfortable in his family's company. Now, Eric has also been drunk throughout the whole engagement party, but his parents seem to ignore this. But we have not seen as much of Eric as the other characters throughout this play. He has been off stage for much of the narrative. When he has been present, he has often been disengaged from a family's conversations. So it is only when the inspector begins to interrogate Eric that the audience is given its greatest insight into his character. This scene reveals a number of Eric's dark secrets. Let's summarise what happens. First of all, Eric reveals that he met Eva Smith during a drunken night at the Palace Bar. He insisted upon going back to her lodgings and pressurised her to sleep with him. So Eric thus begins a relationship with Eva. Eva later has some bad news for Eric. She reveals that she is pregnant and needs financial support. Now at this moment, Eric panics. He first of all proposes to marry Eva, but she turns this proposal down. Next, Eric steals money from his father's business to help Eva, but she refuses to accept this money. The interrogation ends, and Eric is furious when he discovers that his mother refused to grant Eva charitable support. In fact, Eric now blames Mrs. Birling for Eva and his unborn child's death. This video is going to analyse what we discover about Eric's character from this scene. Let's look at our first idea. Eric is an entitled character who used his power to exploit Eva Smith. Right from the very beginning of their relationship, Eric treated Eva with callous selfishness. He firstly insisted, against Eva's will, upon entering her lodgings. Such words clearly indicate that Eva did not want to let Eric in. Now, let's zoom into this word insisted a bit more. This is a very strong, forceful word. Eric didn't ask Eva politely to be let into her lodgings. Instead, he clearly put her under a lot of pressure. He was forceful in his attempt to sleep with her. Indeed, Eric even threatens to make a row if Eva does not let him in. So this is basically a thinly veiled threat to Eva. Eric is suggesting that he will get her in trouble with the authorities unless she lets him into her lodgings. This puts Eva into a very difficult situation. In fact, you could say that Eva is powerless, because the authorities would likely take the side of Eric against Eva in any such dispute. After all, Eric is a rich young man from a powerful family, while Eva is an impoverished prostitute. The authorities would be therefore more likely to trust Eric than Eva. So Eric is more powerful than Eva, both by virtue of his gender and his class. Eric thus abuses his privileged position to use Eva for his pleasure. In a vague attempt to describe what happens next, Eric claims that he was in that state when a chap easily turns nasty. So Eric doesn't really explain what happens when he enters Eva's lodgings. But this phrase may be a euphemism for rape. We're not exactly sure, but at the very least, Eric bullied Eva into sleeping with him. Now, Eric's phrasing here is rather odd. He doesn't describe himself here. Instead, he refers to himself as a chap. He talks about himself in the third person. He doesn't say, I was in a state when I turn easily nasty. He talks about being in a state when a chap easily turns nasty. So why does he talk about himself in the third person? Well, when Eric is talking about a chap, he is probably referring to other rich, privileged males like him. Eric is thus generalizing his behavior here. He is subtly suggesting that this behavior is typical for other rich chaps like him. Other people do this. Priestley may therefore be suggesting that there are many other rich, privileged chaps like Eric who abuse their power over vulnerable women. The playwright is thus using Eric's behavior to exemplify a wider societal injustice. Now let's make no mistake, this relationship was purely for Eric's pleasure. He states that he was not in love with Eva, but liked her because she was pretty and a good sport. Now, these words reveal Eric's true motivation behind his relationship with Eva. The adjective pretty suggests that Eric was attracted to Eva. He perhaps saw her as little more than an object to satisfy his lust. By calling her a good sport, Eric is meanwhile implying that Eva's company was great because she agreed to sleep with him. She submitted to his wishes. She allowed herself to be used for his pleasure. The inspector is particularly cutting in his judgment on Eric's behavior. Goole condemns Eric for treating Eva like an animal, a thing, not a person. The inspector is suggesting that Eric did not recognize Eva's humanity and value. Instead, he simply used her as an object to satisfy his sexual desires. Now we could draw a comparison between Eric's behavior and that of his father, Mr. Birling. Whereas Birling exploited Eva as cheap labor, Eric exploited Eva as an object for his sexual pleasure. Both used her as a means to an end. Neither recognized her as a person of inherent worth. Eva was merely a tool that they used to attain their selfish desires. So since this play is a work of social criticism, we must always ask ourselves this question: what is Priestley criticizing here? Well, once again, Priestley is highlighting how the wealthy exploit the poor for their personal gain. He is criticizing the rich and powerful for feeding upon the poor and vulnerable members of society. So we've now finished analysing our first point. Eric is an entitled character who uses his power to exploit Eva Smith. It's now time to test your memory. Read that sentence one more time. Eric is an entitled character who uses his power to exploit Eva Smith. In a second, the words in bold are going to disappear. You will only have the first letter of each word. Try reading the sentence now. Eric is an E character who uses his P to E Eva Smith. Let's see if you got that right. Eric is an entitled character who uses his power to exploit Eva Smith. Well done if you got that right. In spite of Eric's heinous treatment of Eva, Priestley does not portray him as a monster. Instead, Eric seems to be something of a pathetic character. He is a lost and wayward young man who has never grown up. This brings us to our second idea. Eric is an immature character. Indeed, Eva calls Eric a kid. The audience might well agree with this assessment. The shocking revelations about Eric's wayward lifestyle all testify to a man who has not grown up. His uncontrollable drinking and casual relationship with Eva Smith together demonstrate that Eric has failed to take responsibility for his life. Now, Eric does attempt to fix the damage he has caused Eva. He tries to marry her, and even steals money from his father to help support Eva. But these are all misjudged attempts to fix the situation. They are short-term solutions to a far more complex problem. Eric's inability to look after Eva demonstrates that he has not grown up. He is not ready to take responsibility for looking after others. Eva's judgment that Eric is a kid therefore seems fitting. What is the cause of Eric's immaturity? Well, Mr. Birling offers one answer. In a scathing criticism, Arthur states that Eric is spoilt, and perhaps Mr. Birling is right. Eric has enjoyed the comforts of an upper middle class background and the benefits of a private school education. He is a privileged young man who has probably faced few challenges in his life. He has therefore never been forced to grow up and take responsibility, whereas people from more deprived backgrounds may have endured struggle and hardship to survive. Everything has already been handed to Eric on a plate. So perhaps the very ease of Eric's upbringing has fueled this character's restless, wayward lifestyle. Perhaps his alcohol abuse is therefore an attempt to fill a void in what otherwise seems to be an empty existence of stifling comfort and ease. In a sense, his wayward behavior is thus an act of rebellion against his privileged upbringing. So maybe Mr. Birling is right. Maybe Eric's immaturity is a consequence of a spoiled upbringing. But maybe there is a more sympathetic way of looking at Eric's immaturity. In spite of all the benefits that his parents have granted him, this young man seems to be estranged from his mum and dad. Eric has enjoyed a comfortable, middle-class upbringing, but his parents seem to hold little affection for him. In fact, Eric has always been judged as a failure by his parents. We can see this earlier in the play. A number of scenes ago, Mr. Birling said to Eric, "It's about time you learned to face a few responsibilities. That's something this public school and varsity life you've had doesn't seem to teach you." These words reveal a great deal about Birling's view of Eric. Birling seems to resent Eric. He has spent a huge amount of money on his son's public school and varsity life. He has given Eric all the benefits that Arthur never enjoyed while he was growing up. Yet for all this privilege, Arthur believes that Eric has never learned to take responsibility. In other words, Arthur views Eric as a disappointment. So it thus seems that Eric has probably been judged as a failure by his parents the whole way through his life. And you can imagine the sort of negative consequences that this has had for Eric's sense of self-esteem. His destructive lifestyle is perhaps therefore fueled by a low self-esteem that he has acquired since childhood. His wayward behavior confirms that he is the failure that his parents have always deemed him to be. So what is the cause of Eric's immaturity? Well, we've looked at two different views. Perhaps it is a result of his spoiled upbringing. On the other hand, it may be because he has always been judged as a failure by his parents. So we've now analysed two aspects of Eric's character. In a minute, we're going to test your memory once again. But before we begin, let's revise these two ideas once again. Number one, Eric is an entitled character who uses his power to exploit Eva Smith. Number two, Eric is an immature character. Now try saying these two sentences, filling in the words in blank. You have the first letters of each word to help you. You've got 10 seconds. Okay, let's look at the answers. Number one, Eric is an entitled character who uses his power to exploit Eva Smith. And number two, Eric is an immature character. Great job if you got those right. Let's go on to our next point. Number three, Eric has a dysfunctional relationship with his family. As we have seen, there has been an underlying unease in Eric's interactions with his family throughout the play. But it is only during Eric's interrogation that we see these tensions finally explode to the surface. The tension begins to rise at the very beginning of this scene. The stage directions describe how the characters watch narrowly as Eric helps himself with familiarity to a large, strong drink before his interrogation. So the idea that Eric is pouring this drink with familiarity suggests that he has done this many times is a reflection of his alcohol addiction. The family narrows their eyes at Eric disapprovingly as he pours this drink. It is likely that this is a significant moment for his parents. They are recognizing Eric's addiction for the first time. So Mr. Birling therefore says, "I understand a lot of things now I didn't understand before." Yet the audience may think this is a bit strange. We have noticed that Eric has been clearly intoxicated the whole way through the play. Have the Birling parents really just discovered their son's drinking problem for the first time? Well, it is likely that the Birling parents have actually been willfully ignorant of their son's drinking problem and other forms of wayward behaviour until now. Now that phrase, willfully ignorant, means that they have chosen to ignore Eric's drinking, and they've chosen to ignore Eric's wayward behaviour. They have been aware of it deep down, but instead they have chosen to ignore it. They have chosen to sweep it under the carpet. Eric seems to understand this. In a damning criticism of his mother, Eric says that she never even tried to understand anything. Such words ring true. The Birling parents would rather maintain their complacent, rose-tinted perspective of their family than recognize the truth. The Birling parents chose to ignore the dangerous lifestyle of the wayward son. They would rather choose illusion over reality. They do not want to ruin the perfect image of a postcard family. The dysfunctionality of this relationship is further emphasized by Eric's choice to steal money from his father to help support Eva. When Arthur angrily asks why he didn't ask for help, Eric responds that Birling isn't the kind of father a chap could go to when he's in trouble. Such words imply that Eric does not trust his father. Now he is in a desperate situation here. He had made an impoverished girl pregnant. She desperately needed money. But in this time of crisis, Arthur was the last person Eric would go to for help. Well, why is this? Well, Eric already feels judged by his father. He probably doesn't want to damage his standing in the family even more by now admitting that he got Eva pregnant. So instead, he chooses to steal from Arthur rather than go to him for advice. Eric's estranged relationship with his parents leads to disastrous consequences. The lack of communication between these characters ultimately leads to the death of both Eva Smith and Eric's child. Because if Mrs. Birling had known about her son's involvement with Eva, she would probably have given some charitable support to the impoverished woman. But in her ignorance, Eric's mother instead condemned Eva and her unborn child to death. Eric thus blames his mother for Eva's death. He forcefully states, "You killed her, and the child should have had two. My child, your own grandchild." Eric's dead child is therefore both a symbol and a legacy of his broken relationship with his parents. Through their failure to build a relationship with Eric, the Birling parents have unwittingly caused the death of their own grandchild. Their mistakes have come back to haunt this family in the most tragic of forms. So we've now looked at 3 different aspects of Eric's character. In a minute we're going to test you on them again. But first of all we will read through all 3 ideas one more time. Number 1, Eric is an entitled character. He uses his power to exploit Eva Smith. Number 2, Eric is an immature character. Number 3, Eric has a dysfunctional relationship with his family. Take one last look at all 3 of those sentences. Try to memorize them, concentrate upon them, because these keywords will disappear in a second. Okay, there you go. You've got 15 seconds. Go through all 3 sentences, say them to yourselves, and try to fill in the key words. Okay, let's check how many of those you got right. So number 1, Eric is an entitled character, uses his power to exploit Eva Smith. Number 2, Eric is an immature character. And number 3, Eric has a dysfunctional relationship with his family. So well done if you got all right. So we have now demonstrated that Eric has an estranged relationship with his parents. A relationship which has led to truly tragic consequences. But Priestley does provide some hope for redemption in this extract. This leads us to our fourth and final idea. Eric feels great shame for his actions. Eric's response to the inspector's questioning is very different to his parents'. While his parents refuse to display any guilt for their interactions with Eva Smith, Eric is filled with remorse. This can be witnessed in Eric's description of his first night with Eva. Eric uses rather strange language to describe what happened. He says that he was in that state when a chap easily turns nasty. Now, let's take a look at these words for a second time. As we have said, Eric does not actually state what happened. He does not describe what he actually did to Eva. Instead, he uses rather vague language here. Now, perhaps he is trying to distance himself from the crime he has committed by leaving it unrevealed. He doesn't want to bring more shame upon himself in front of his family. But I think a more likely explanation is he uses vague language because he can't bear to admit to himself what he actually did. He is so horrified by his treatment of Eva Smith that he can't even verbalize it. Indeed, Eric is so ashamed here that he talks about himself in the third person. He refers to being in that state when a chap easily turns nasty. Eric is so disgusted by his behaviour that he can't even involve himself in his own memory. He is talking here as if this horrific crime was carried out by someone else. He is trying to disassociate himself from his actions. Eric's attempts to shield himself from his monstrous behaviour is, however, futile. It is clear that he is tortured by this memory. Eric describes the vagueness of his memory as hellish and exclaims, "Oh, my God, how stupid it all is." The use of dashes in the script here gives the impression that Eric speaks these words in a broken manner. He is so overwhelmed with guilt that he is even struggling to speak. Now we should also consider Eric's use of religious language here. He references both hell and God. Now perhaps this language is subtly reflecting Eric's hopes for redemption. He is aware of the severity of his sins and recognizes that he must be saved. He wants to change his life. So in spite of his appalling behavior, Eric may win some sympathy from the audience here. Unlike his parents, Eric is filled with guilt for his treatment of Eva Smith and takes responsibility for his actions. Such words may therefore hint that Eric is developing into a more mature, considerate, and responsible character by the end of the play. He is growing from a child into a man. And that brings us to the end of this video. Before we finish, we will revise our 4 main ideas about Eric Birling once again. We will read through these 4 sentences one more time before we will test you upon them. So, let's read number 1. Eric is an entitled character who uses his power to exploit Eva Smith. Number 2, Eric is an immature character. Number 3, Eric has a dysfunctional relationship with his family. And number 4, Eric feels great shame for his actions. We will now test you upon these 4 sentences by getting rid of the key words. Let's see. Okay, you now have 20 seconds to read through all 4 sentences. Try to fill in the key words. Off you go. Okay, let's see how we have done. Okay, let's see if you've got all of these right. We will read through them one more time. Number 1, Eric is an entitled character. He uses his power to exploit Eva Smith. Number 2, Eric is an immature character. Number 3, Eric has a dysfunctional relationship with his family. And number 4, Eric feels great shame for his actions. Well done if you've got full marks in this video. And that brings us to the end of this video. If you want to have a look at my textbook, you can find it in the information box below. And if you found this video useful, please like and subscribe. We will be releasing lots more videos over the coming weeks and months. The next video will be on the inspector's speech. But until then, all the best.